If I told you.
If I told you.
If I told you.
If I told you.
If I told you that 40% of women killed worldwide were slain by an intimate partner, would you believe it?
If I told you that 1 in 4 U.S. women is a victim of domestic abuse, would you believe it?
If I told you that 15.5 million U.S. children live in violent and abusive homes, would you believe it?
If I told you that 1 in 3 adolescent girls in the U.S. is a victim of physical, emotional, or verbal abuse from a dating partner, would you believe it?
Believe it.
Believe it.
Believe it.
Believe it. The American Medical Association does.
Believe it. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention does.
Believe it. The World Health Organization does.
Domestic abuse impacts people from all races,
religions,
ethnicities,
sexual orientations,
and socioeconomic backgrounds.
Domestic abuse happens in my community.
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 Domestic abuse happens in my community. Do you believe it?
When it first happened to me, I didn't believe it.
When I told my friends, no one believed me.
If I told you that most domestic abuse incidents are never reported, would you believe it?
Believe it.
Believe it.
Believe it.
Listen.
Ask.
Learn more.
Love should be safe.
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 Hello and welcome to a new season of The Safety Net. I'm your host, Stephen Bressler. We've come back after a lengthy hiatus and are pleased that you are joining us for our program dealing with domestic abuse. While we are located in Brookline, Massachusetts, you may be viewing our show from anywhere in the Commonwealth or across the country. As you hear about programs in Massachusetts, look for similar programs in your area geared to helping victims of domestic abuse. I want to refer viewers to an important book written by noted Pennsylvania psychiatrist and Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky. The title of the book is The Shame Born in Silence, Spouse Abuse in the Jewish Community. And if you are watching this program and are not Jewish, much of what is in this book is universal and may also be relevant for you. And as we discuss spousal abuse, please note that much of this may also apply to women in dating relationships and to women in same-sex relationships. And men in same-sex relationships may also find themselves in abusive relationships. So while the thrust of our program today is about a husband and wife, everyone tuning in should pay attention. Today, I am pleased to be joined by Elizabeth Shern-Viner, Director of Journey to Safety, the domestic abuse program of the Jewish Family and Children's Service in Greater Boston, and Jule Youdovin, Outreach and Program Coordinator, also with Journey to Safety. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
For as long as I can remember, Elizabeth and Julie, it's always been said that there is no domestic abuse in Jewish families, that Jewish husbands are not like that. But apparently that's a myth, otherwise there'd be no need for a Journey to Safety. Can you tell us, what is the Jewish Family and Children's Service and what is Journey to Safety?
Happily. So Jewish Family and Children's Service is more than 150 years old. We're a large human service agency located in Waltham, but we serve at least 200 cities and towns in the greater Boston area. And while our early roots were predominantly to fill a gap in need for the Jewish community, our services have expanded to serve most anybody who turns to us. And we have many different kinds of services really along the lifespan, whether it's young families or older adults. In addition to that, Journey to Safety came to be really because Jewish survivors, particularly one in particular, but several others, a woman named Jule, herself a survivor, realized after getting out of a really difficult marriage that she didn't feel there was any Jewish specific service for her to turn to for the abuse that she'd endured. And so she took a lot of leadership and kind of got grassroots support and helped to get Journey to Safety off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that was over almost 20 years ago, really.
How long have you been with Journey to Safety?
I've been there for a little more than 9 years.
9 years. And Julie, how about you?
That's a good question. I dated actually by one of my kids who was in kindergarten when I started, and he just finished his junior year in high school. So whatever that many years is, it's probably 11 or 11,
Wow.
I think it's 11 years, that long.
Why did you choose to do this, to get into this field, this area of domestic abuse?
So, and I do hope we get to go back and talk a little more about what Journey to Safety is
Sure.
and our services, but just to answer your question, my journey to this work started actually when I was a student in Israel, and I volunteered, it was actually part of like a scholarship program, and so I volunteered at the Rape Crisis Center in Tel Aviv, and that was kind of my introduction to serving victims and feminism. And then later I became a victim advocate in I was in 2 different district attorney's offices where I worked a lot with survivors of domestic abuse in the courts. And that really helped me understand some of the systemic issues and challenges.
How about you, Julie?
Well, the short answer is a long time ago when we were living in Michigan, I answered a want ad at a domestic abuse program and got the job. And then was there for more than 10 years. And moved to Massachusetts and wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do. And it just turned out that the house that we moved into was around the corner from the founding director of the program that became Journey to Safety. And I got to know her first as a playground mom at the school, and then figured out what she did, and then there was a job, and then here I am.
Wow. So tell us about Journey to Safety.
So Journey to Safety, as I mentioned, Jule was really the founder and helped create this program. And it was to fill this gap, this need, because there weren't any other Jewish-specific services for survivors. And so it started with a half-time person, the director that Julie's mentioning. And it was really to provide some direct service and connections and resources and referrals. And over time, it grew. And more the work included things like legal services and helping people access resources, particularly when they didn't have access to financial resources. Mm-hmm. And so we've become more and more integrated within the agency, and that's been a really huge plus for a program to be embedded in a large agency with many, many resources and a real desire to collaborate. That's really one of the great strengths for Journey to Safety, to be at Jewish Family and Children's Service.
Yeah, when Julie attends meetings of the Brookline Domestic Violence Roundtable, she's very big on talking about collaboration with other organizations. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What direct services do you provide?
So the direct services that we provide are supportive and domestic abuse counseling. So we meet with people one-on-one, and we're very cautious about meeting wherever it's safe for them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that means coming to our office, and we actually have access to ride services and funding so that we can bring people to us if they can't get to us, or we meet people in the community, if it's a library or a Starbucks or wherever is safe and convenient for the survivors that we serve. And so that's the direct service part, and included in that is a lot of case management. Might be they're looking to get into a shelter or housing. They're trying to get out of the housing that they're in and get into new housing. They may need legal services. A lot of our clients need legal services, and we've actually created a program where we use private attorneys and pay them out of a fund that we have, a low fee. We call them low bono attorneys, but to the client it's free. And so all of those services are specific to either restraining orders or family law issues and needs.
What's your caseload? How many
So
clients?
we serve about 200 people a year, and we have 2 direct service staff plus student interns, and we're a smaller program in the landscape of domestic abuse programs, and about 35% of our clients are Jewish. and others come from many different backgrounds and speak some different languages, especially the Russian-speaking community. We have dedicated funds to fund a full-time advocate who's Russian-speaking. So that's about our caseload. And then the other kinds of services that we provide are, we have funds for relocation assistance, for emergency gift cards, and we have a new program we're really interested in, and we've really been seeing and hearing from the people that we work with a lot about the economic barriers. And those play out in access to affordable childcare, access to affordable housing, access to affordable kind of everything. And so we've created a model or a program that we call Journey to Self-Empowerment. And that's to support people in a very supportive, trauma-informed way, to give them a mentor, to help them identify goals, economic specific goals, whether it's budgeting, dealing with debt, or career advancement, so that people can make the steps that they identify for themselves to move to a place where they feel safer, but also without economic security, they're not safe.
Yeah.
And we know that, and there's research that shows that. So we're really committed to that.
So you have 2 counselors, women counselors, I would assume.
They are women.
Okay. No, I mean, my understanding is that it makes women victims, survivors feel more comfortable if they're talking to other women who understand what the abuse is all about.
So you know, women are disproportionately impacted by domestic abuse. There are male survivors with female abusers, and there are same-sex couples where abuse happens, one perpetrates abuse on the other, because really, when we think about what's the definition of domestic abuse, it's a pattern of controlling behavior that one partner imposes on another over time. And so that can happen across all the different ways that it can happen.
And there's physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. You deal with all financial abuse.
And what we think about is identity abuse. So just all those things that are what make a person, what make you you. So it could be your gender identity, it could be your faith or your religion or spirituality, all of those things combined. Technology is another thing. We're hearing more and more about different ways that abusive individuals use technology to be abusive. So, right, that whole, there's so many different ways. It's not just physical abuse. I'm really glad that you pointed that out. There's so many different ways that abusive individuals are abusive every day. And we definitely see folks where there hasn't been any physical abuse, and then we see folks where that's the primary narrative of their story and everything in between.
But it's important to note that while there may not be physical abuse in the way that kind of people may think about it, where someone may have a black eye or they've been strangled or other kinds of things, there are other ways that an abuser can really show their power and their control. They may not allow the survivor access to any of the bank accounts or credit cards. They may keep them, we talk a lot about how survivors become isolated from family members, from community members. So it's very complicated and complex and nuanced at times. So a lot of our work is really listening carefully to survivors' stories and kind of really understanding what's been going on.
Are there any risk predictors? So let's say you've got a teenage daughter who's dating someone, and something's going off, and she tells you what's going on, and you say, this kid sounds somewhat controlling. Is there anything? What would you say to a viewer who's got a teenage daughter and is dating and wants to make sure that the daughter is safe in dating? What should she be on the lookout for?
Well, I think it's really about the context of what's going on, and how is that person, how is the daughter, for instance, has her behavior changed? Is she skipping classes? Is she not sleeping well? Is she maybe not eating? Like, what has changed, if anything, in her behavior? Has she stopped going out with friends? Is she, looking to respond immediately to a text message from the person she may be dating, and afraid if she doesn't respond right away, there'll be a consequence? So those are just some of the things. You may have more to add.
Yeah, no, I think especially what you said about giving up activities. If she is doing less of the things that she cares about, quitting a team, quitting an orchestra, quitting a play, things like that. Because sometimes, a lot of times actually, what starts out sounding really loving becomes clearly very controlling later in the relationship. So that somebody who's controlling might start by saying, you know, if you didn't have to have this activity for 2 hours every day after school, think of all the time we could spend together. And I love being with you, and I just want to get to know you better. And could you make a little more space and time in your life for me? That can sound really sweet and caring and exciting in a new relationship. And so it's just important to identify that when anybody you know, whether it's a child or a friend or a family member, when their world is getting smaller to accommodate a relationship, that's a big red flag. Because we see a healthy relationship, obviously sometimes couples need to sit down and say, we haven't spent any time together in the past week, we need to make time for each other. That's healthy. But when one person is asked to give up the things they care most about to make a lot of room for this relationship, that's a red flag. That's something that we're going to listen for. I also know parents have talked about one of the red flags for them that they didn't recognize necessarily but found out later was that if your child's friends don't like the partner, that can be a red flag. If nobody around your child, the people who know your kid best besides you, that can be a red flag also. Those kinds of things. If your child is always not home, if the dates are always at the partner's house or someplace else, never in your home, kind of what's going on? Why don't they come over and hang out at your house also? So those are also some additional things.
And of course, looking for bruises on the physical aspects of preliminary battering.
Yeah, I mean, of course, to be aware of that as well. You know, one of the things we talk about is that every time an abuser does something that might be off or controlling, and then they stay together, you know, they've created a new normal. And so, you know, it's important for the people in the survivor's life to kind of start to notice that, because the survivor themselves may not, because they've become very invested in kind of pleasing or keeping this person kind of calm and at a manageable and predictable place for themselves.
At what point when a relationship starts to go bad, do you usually find a client coming to you?
It really varies, and I think we'll shift back to adults because that's really who we serve directly. There's more services we didn't get to, and a big part of what we do and a part of what Jule does is education and awareness raising and prevention. And we have a Teen Safe program where we do work directly with teens who become peer leaders and become educators and are in the Jewish community very specifically to raise awareness and kind of bring their knowledge to their peers and to the Jewish community to really raise the visibility of dating abuse. But specifically with adults that we serve, the kinds of the times that they come to us can really vary. Usually there's been some kind of new crisis that has happened. Sometimes it's a friend who has said to them, you know, this is really, you know, are you safe? Like, this just doesn't seem right. You know, I've heard about this program, you should consider going there. A lot of people research us online and find us, you know, either because we are a Jewish program, a Russian-speaking program, or we're in the Waltham area. And others, you know, have legal issues. A lot of what most of us in the community don't understand is that domestic abuse plays out in probate court in a way that's really hard for survivors and their children. And so a very kind of cunning abuser knows how to kind of make the system continue the abuse. We call that domestic violence by proxy. So they use that system. So often people turn to us when they're really afraid of how things are going in the legal system. And other people have had serious physical events against them, and a police officer or somebody else in the community who knows them might refer them to us. So it really varies. We also, as we mentioned, we're embedded in Jewish Family and Children's Service, so a lot of people within a lot of our colleagues may hear something from a survivor who's getting services for something else and say, you know, there's this program, Journey to Safety. We think they might be a resource and a help to you.
You get referrals from rabbis?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, and those are powerful because that means, first of all, somebody has told their rabbi what's going on, and that the rabbi has responded in such an effective and supportive way and has said, there's help for you. And one of the messages that we try to get out in the community is that everybody in the community doesn't have to be the expert. What we are hoping everybody in the community has is the phone number, and is the ability to say, I'm here for you, I support you, I care about you, and I want to connect you to these folks who know a lot more about this than I do. And so when we get referrals from clergy, from therapists, from people like that, it's such a powerful thing for a survivor to hear that and get referred in that way.
Maybe while we're talking about having the phone number, you can put the graphic up that shows how to contact these folks at Journey to Safety. That would be good, because I'm sure that people are going to want to write that down. Sure. Do you find that rabbis in 2019 are more equipped, more knowledgeable about dealing with domestic violence? Because I would guess that in the past there may have been issues with not wanting to get involved with that. And again, like clergy from other faiths, other denominations, they tend to want to bring people together and maintain the family structure instead of saying, maybe you should leave.
Yeah, it's really across the spectrum of how different clergy, I think, understand the issue. I think there is definitely a greater awareness. But as you know, the clergy reflect many denominations, and so there are different ways in which survivors engage, or congregants engage with a rabbi for needs. So some kind of see the rabbi as their go-to for everything, and others may not. Or also, and Julie will talk more about this, but the myth that you mentioned earlier is still really quite alive, and especially if someone is in a higher socioeconomic community, there's also a lot of shame, additional shame, that they may have needs, whereas they may think of themselves also as a donor to a program like ours.
Yeah, and I think in addition to those things, one of the challenges that I'm so glad we're at the point where we're even talking about this as a challenge is that clergy often do, if somebody comes in with a black eye, would say, oh, this is a problem, let's figure it out. But the education that we do about the things that you were talking about, Elizabeth is talking about, that your congregant may have no physical injury or no visible injuries, but there could be terrible things going on. And here are some of the things to listen for. I had a meeting with the rabbi not too long ago, and at the end of the conversation, that rabbi said, I've been working with somebody, I've been meeting with somebody, and after this meeting, I really need to rethink what's going on. And so getting rabbis that information about what economic abuse looks like, what emotional abuse looks like, responding to those things, and also indicating that there's danger there. Like Elizabeth was saying, even when there's not physical abuse, if somebody has no money, even though they live in a fabulous house and drive a fabulous car, but they can't leave because if they leave, as soon as they walk off their front steps, they own nothing. They're not safe, even if they're not being hit. And so getting that kind of information out to clergy so that they recognize what's in front of them sometimes, I think is a challenge. And it's not the clergy's fault. This is just something as a society and as a community we haven't talked a lot about publicly.
And domestic violence hits all aspects, all economic strata.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you can have very wealthy people, doctors, lawyers, big business people who are controlling and abusing their wives.
Yeah. And as you saw in the PSA that you showed at the beginning of our show today, first of all, that PSA was made by 3 women. Not made by, but they funded the creation of that, and they had a lot of input into the design and the kind of the concept to raise awareness. Do you believe, kind of thing, and so they really wanted to have voices of survivors telling the story, because they themselves represent the higher socioeconomic background, and felt that because of that they weren't believed and weren't supported by their friends, family members, and rabbis. So
now, Journey to Safety is a program of JF and CS, and you're funded, I guess, in part or whole by combined Jewish philanthropies?
Certainly not in whole, but they're very generous in their support of us. And we have 3 different governmental grants that we are lucky to receive that fund most of our work, as well as very generous donors.
And so you do accept tax-deductible donations?
And we are very happy to accept them. And we've received grants we get a grant from the TJX Foundation. We've received support over the years from the Miriam Fund. So there's many different ways that we seek funding always.
That's great. What other services have we not talked about yet? Or what have we not talked about that you really want to make sure it gets out here?
Do you want to go first?
No, you go ahead.
I think really just talking a little bit more about the Jewish piece and what it means to look through a Jewish lens, as our program does. And it's a question that we ask ourselves, I think, all the time, is what does it mean to look through a Jewish lens when we're talking about abuse? And so, as you so eloquently stated earlier, abuse is not just about physical violence. And so what we do is when we go into Jewish spaces is really talk about, so what does this look like in a Jewish family? So it might mean that the abusive partner is deciding whether or not the family is going to affiliate with any Jewish community at all. Maybe deciding everything about the kid's Jewish education. Maybe saying, well, I know you grew up in a different kind of community and you feel that that's your community, but I don't care. In this family, we are going to join this congregation and practice our Judaism this way. So it can look a lot of ways like that. Sometimes we see cases sometimes about day school tuition and whether or not a student can attend day school. It really varies, like whether or not a family is going to keep kosher. There's a lot in this whole conversation about emotional abuse and economic abuse that's very directly related to decisions that Jewish families make about how they are Jewish and how they practice being Jewish. And so that's part of what we talk about. We also look at a lot of the cultural forces. We talk about shame, but when we talk about shame in a Jewish space, we're going to talk about this concept of shanda and about how survivors, and sometimes some Jewish survivors, not all, may be really concerned that the community is looking at them like they're in a fishbowl, saying, oh, did you hear what's going on in that house? It's a shanda, that stage where the way people sometimes talk about embarrassing or gossipy things. So that can be operative. This concept of shalom bayit, which is such a beautiful concept about peace in the home and maintaining peace in the home, gets horribly twisted with abuse, and how that works and what peace at home means can be all bent out of shape. So we talk about that. We also talk about the fact that many Jews see themselves as donors to programs, not as recipients, not as people who are going to pick up the phone and say, hi, I need help. But instead feel like they should be writing a check to us instead of calling and saying, this is what I need. So how do we speak to those folks when we're out in the community and say, we're here for you and we see you, even though you might feel very invisible, we know that you're out there. So that's another piece. And then another thing, there's a lot, but the fourth thing I just wanted to mention was the stereotypes that Jewish survivors live with. This is very gender-based, as you've both said. Abuse does not necessarily mean female survivor, male perpetrator. That's what every family looks like. But when we're talking about these cultural forces, for a woman the stereotypes that surround Jewish men and Jewish women are very powerful. So Jewish men, often the stereotypes are about being a doctor, a lawyer, a banker, a good provider, good to his mother, a family man, those kinds of things. And around Jewish women, when I ask, and these are all from when I ask in groups and people tell me, Jewish women are often nagging, materialistic, all about money, unrealistic relationship expectations, things like that. So when somebody who's living in the shadow of that kind of stereotype, that they're all of these things, says this doctor, banker, lawyer, good provider pushed me down the stairs last night. Temple president pushed me down the stairs last night, kicked me in the head while I was on the floor, yelled at me until 3 o'clock in the morning, and then took the kids to school the next day and told all the neighbors that I wasn't feeling well, so I'm helping out at home. It's really hard for folks to be believed with the stereotypes that they live with, because quite often what Jewish women will hear is, what'd you do to make him so mad? Or every relationship has its bumps. Or, oh, just make him a nice dinner and get some sexy underwear and he'll forget all about it.
Do you encounter women who've been abused who claim or believe that they were responsible for the abuser doing whatever he did?
Yeah. There's a lot of kind of, I don't want to quite say brainwashing, but there's this is always about over time. You know, these things happen over time. It's not just that it was a one-time. Most times, if someone goes out on a date and the partner, the new person, you know, does something really horrible, they probably wouldn't go on a second date. So abuse starts to evolve gradually and slowly, like I said earlier, where there's a new normal and then things go along and then something else might happen. So it's over time, and what also happens is that a survivor's self-esteem starts to really dwindle, and they become very dependent on the abuser for kind of everything in many ways.
You know, you cannot claim to be a religious Jewish person if you abuse your wife. I mean, the tenet in Judaism is to love your wife the way you love yourself, or more than you love yourself. So.
Absolutely. And I think with that blame, some of the issue is also just that if the abusive person is saying this is your fault, and then you tell a friend and your friend says, well, why don't you learn to cook? I'll help you. I have this great brisket recipe. What that friend is actually saying is, this is your fault. You can fix this. Instead of, that's not an okay thing to say to you. How can I help you? What do you need? So I think that's part of the blame. We participate in that blame all the time inadvertently in our society by trying to help somebody instead of saying, whoa, this isn't okay.
Right. One of the things we're really cautious about is when someone thinks they want to see a therapist for themselves, or a lot of times they say we need a couples counselor. And we're very cautious in ever referring a survivor to go to a couples counselor with their abusive partner, because it's not a safe and balanced situation.
It doesn't work. Everything that I've read
says there's a big
says
imbalance of power, and so that has to be really kept in mind, and so support the survivor, help the survivor find the support that she needs, separate from the abusive person.
Well, with that, Elizabeth, we are about out of time. I want to thank you, Elizabeth Schoenweiner and Jule Youdovin of Journey to Safety, for being here today. Please remember what Rabbi Dr. Twersky says: all women have the right to be treated with dignity and respect. You do not have to tolerate either physical or emotional abuse. The Safety Net is a project of the Brookline Domestic Violence Roundtable in cooperation with Brookline Interactive Group. See you next time.